for people listening right now who haven't heard of you before or know what you've done.
That's a heck of a way to start a conversation.
That was a great opener.
I mean, I will not do that in a bar. It's like, hey, babe, got a minute to talk about the theory of everything? This is my number, though. It's not a formula.
No, you got to direct them to your documentary. But you recently came out with a great film, highly informational, called Accidental Truth. And how long did you work on this? This had to be like 5-6 years, right?
Well, the film itself took me about 1.5 years to edit.
Yes.
And some of the interviews that came out in it weren't even shot before I actually started the film. But the actual material, some of it goes back to 2007 when I first interviewed some of these people.
Oh, some of it goes all the way back to 2007. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Like I've interviewed Nick Pope like 3 or 4 times, and the first one was in, I think, 2008.
And for people out there, who is he?
Nick Pope is a former British Ministry of Defense UFO desk guy. When I was growing up, he used to write a column for UFO magazine, and I was like, "Wow, here's this government guy, talking to the community," and I thought that was pretty cool. And and so here we are all these years later.
Yeah. So you obviously had an interest in this for a long time, but in your doc, which I'll put the link in the description for everyone to go buy it and check it out. I definitely recommend it. But in your doc, you went at it from all different types of angles. I like this. It reminded me, as far as like the number of angles, it was reminiscent of the phenomenon, which our mutual friend James Fox did.
Oh, yeah.
It almost seems like they're watching us, like a god a little bit, if this is the case, to make sure we don't destroy ourselves.
So I interviewed a number of eyewitnesses regarding that aspect of the phenomenon, and that is particularly during the Cold War, the height of the Cold War. They are witnessed in Russia and all scattered across the United States. And this launch control officer, Robert Salas, I'll never forget this. He said, "Well, James, the message I got when they shut our nukes off, it's almost like they were taking matches out of the hands of a baby."
But I'm fascinated at the fact that there are now so many of these people who are talking, be it the Luis Elizondos, the Chris Mellons, some of the colonels and generals you've spoken to, who have kind of come out in recent years and started to talk about the phenomenon. And, my little red light sensor goes up right away and goes, aha, like
sure.
What's the agenda here? But when you're going into this and making the documentary, are you suspicious of that at all? Or do you trust the information you're going to be getting from them because you're sitting right across from them and you feel like you could get a read for it?
That's interesting, because at the very beginning of the documentary, the only time you really see or hear much of me is because Matthew Modine narrates it, which is great. But at the very beginning, I say something like, I'm sitting in these rooms alone with people that have run secret weapons programs, interrogated terrorists, protected closely guarded secrets for a living. And all I can think about is getting them to tell me something they don't want me to know. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much every interview that I walked into where I knew that I was dealing with somebody like that. That was in the back of my mind. And I would ask questions designed to try to get some kind of information out of them that was beyond what they're actually willing to say with their words. And that's what Accidental Truth is about. I successfully did that with Elizondo. I did it with Christopher Mellon. Gary Nolan.
Can you explain to people who don't know? A lot of people listening absolutely will know, but for those who aren't as familiar with ufology and things, who is Luis Elizondo?
So Luis Elizondo is in 2017, the New York Times broke that story about the Navy studying UFOs, and that was a guy named Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Keene, and there was another, I can't remember her name, there was another writer that helped break that story, and I apologize to her for not getting it. But that was a story that came out and said, yes, the military's been studying UFOs since 2004 or slightly before that, and we've been seeing things that we can't describe. And Lou Elizondo came out as a guy who was actually running that program, which
called ATIP?
They called it ATIP. There's a lot of controversy around that, but my investigations have revealed that it's pretty much what he says is true as far as this pipeline of info. But Lou Elizondo ran that program and came out on 60 Minutes saying, we might not be alone. And that was the first time.
Fed.
Yeah, that was, exactly. Yeah. Serving the agenda. But now the agenda is to admit that we might not be alone.
I love when he pauses and he's like, if I say something else, I may say something I'm not allowed to say.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, all right, Lou, we get it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the thing is that I think that there's 3 layers to all this. The first layer is that there are people, and they're very few and far between, who have the big picture as far as what's happening with humankind's interaction with non-human intelligence. And those guys have been in the shadows since the 40s and even probably further back than that. Now, those guys, we're probably never going to know who they are. And with generational stuff, with lack of institutional memory, they may not even know who they were originally. A lot of this information people think is in some big vault somewhere. And my investigations have revealed that these guys have no problem destroying evidence, and that there could very well, at this point in time, not be anybody that is in possession of the cohesive story and the evidence chain going all the way back to the 40s.
What do you mean? Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, which part?
You're saying that like the government, like I have a hard time believing that with even the biggest secrets of mankind that maybe multiple governments are working on, I have a hard time believing that any evidence would be completely destroyed.
Well, we found plenty of evidence that that's the case.
But is it tertiary evidence to something that they don't destroy the evidence for, that therefore is actually the center of it, and they just kind of destroy a few documents that might get people on the right path?
Well, it's more like, at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark when they go and there's this big warehouse where everything's stored.
Yes.
Okay, there might be a warehouse like that where, quote unquote, everything is stored. But there might not be very many people who know exactly where it is and what's in it.
Well, that's the other thing. How do they even decide for something like if we're talking about the nature of being joined in our universe, which could be like the greatest national security risk ever,
right?
Potentially. How do you even decide who's a need to know? Like, doesn't that change even? Like, it doesn't mean like every CIA director, like, yeah, we'll tell this one. There might be some where they're like, no, like we're not telling. And who decides?
Well, we have evidence that happened, and that presidents at some point quit being read in, supposedly right after Ronald Reagan. Bill Clinton couldn't get to the information. Obama tried not as hard, but he couldn't get to the information. Trump couldn't get to the information. But Reagan was pretty much read in, and the Bushes are supposedly some of the people that shepherded that transition from what body politic are we going to inform and not inform.
How do we know that, by the way?
There's a lot of historical references to Bush and UFOs, and historical references to, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld. These guys were like the suspicious movers and shakers in Washington before we had suspicious movers and shakers in Washington. These guys were pulling stuff back in the day that now would be like, oh my God, that's a scandal, and we'd be surprised. But don't be surprised. These guys These guys had DC wired and government wired for all kinds of stuff way before we even knew that there was these kind of games being played. And Bush, with his, he was the head of the CIA. He will say, well, he's gone now, but he would say, yeah, I know about this stuff, but I'm never going to talk about it. And so, and this is what I mean. One of the things we point out in Accidental Truth is that there is a history of exactly what we're being told today, being told to us in the 50s. Almost verbatim. It's like they couldn't even afford a new screenwriter. We have the head of the Air Force coming out and saying, yes, we're witnessing these craft and they're not ours. And then in the film, we flash forward to Luis Elizondo. Yes, we're witnessing these craft and they're not ours. We're committed to getting to the bottom of it, they said in the 50s. Then at the Senate hearings on UFOs, they're committed to getting to the bottom of it. Then back to the 50s, General Sanford saying that they're going to start a massive investigation and that they're going to identify whether or not it's a threat. Then fast forward to the Senate hearing where the Moultrie, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, says, yes, we're committed to getting to the bottom of it. And this is a 70-year difference.
Yeah. Thank you for watching the video, guys. Please hit that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.